I'm 78 years old now. I didn't think I'd still be carrying this around at my age, but here it is, sitting with me every morning when I wake up, heavier than my knees, heavier than my breath. It's the story of how my father chose his new wife over me, and how everyone expected me to understand, to be quiet, to not make it harder than it already was. My father has been dead for 12 years. That surprises people when I say it, because they assume time smooths things out. That it turns sharp memories dull. It doesn't. Some things don't fade, they just lose their witnesses. I live alone now. The house is small, quieter than I ever imagined my life would be. When the weather turns, my joints tell me before the radio does. There's a lot of time to think. Too much, maybe. And lately I've been thinking about the boy I was when my mother died, and the man I was expected to become right after. My mother passed when I was 32. Cancer. Fast, cruel, no dignity in it. One year she was still hanging laundry in the yard, the next she was gone. I was married then, had a little boy of my own, trying to figure out mortgages and promotions and how to be a decent husband. I thought my father and I would lean on each other. That's what sons are supposed to do when mothers disappear. For a while, we did. I'd stop by his house after work. We'd sit at the kitchen table where my mother used to drink her tea. He'd talk about how empty the rooms felt. I'd talk about how I didn't know how to grieve properly. We weren't emotional men, but we were present. That mattered. Then, about a year later, he met her. I still remember the way he told me. We were in his living room. He kept standing, sitting, standing again, like he couldn't get comfortable in his own skin. He said her name and smiled in a way I hadn't seen since my mother was alive. That should have made me happy for him. Part of me was. I didn't want him lonely. I didn't want his last years to be empty. But something in my stomach tightened anyway. She was younger than him. Not wildly, but enough that people noticed. She laughed loudly. She had opinions about everything. She talked about fresh starts and moving forward, like those things were easy, like you could just decide them. From the beginning, she made it clear she didn't like talking about my mother. She'd change the subject. She'd say things like, "Dwelling doesn't help anyone." I told myself it wasn't my place to judge. I was an adult. I had my own life. This was his. The wedding happened fast. Small ceremony. I stood there in a rented suit, clapping when everyone else did, telling myself I was being supportive. Afterward, she hugged me a little too tightly and said, "I'm so glad we can all start fresh." I didn't know then that fresh meant without me. The changes were small at first, subtle enough that I questioned myself. He stopped dropping by unannounced. Phone calls became shorter. Holidays shifted. Thanksgiving moved to her sister's house. Christmas morning was suddenly reserved for just them. When I pushed back, gently, he'd sigh and say, "You understand, don't you? She needs time." I understood more than he knew. I understood that she didn't like the reminder that he had a life before her. That he had a son who carried his past in his face. I understood that it was easier for him to ask me to adjust than to ask her to bend. So I adjusted, over and over. I told my wife we'd visit my father another weekend. I told my son Grandpa was busy. I swallowed the irritation when I heard about trips they took without telling me. I laughed it off when she introduced me as his son from his first marriage, like I was a footnote. Each time, something small chipped away. Not enough to cause a scene. Just enough to leave a mark. The unspoken rule became clear. Don't make waves. Don't bring up your mother. Don't question her decisions. Don't take it personally. And above all, don't force your father to choose. The trouble is, he already had. I remember one afternoon vividly. I must have been 40 then. I stopped by his house unannounced, like I used to. She answered the door. Her smile froze when she saw me. She said my father was resting and suggested I call next time. I could hear the television on behind her. I could hear his voice, laughing at something. I drove home furious and ashamed all at once. Furious that I'd been turned away like a stranger. Ashamed that I hadn't insisted. That I'd nodded and left. That pattern repeated itself in different forms for years. Invitations that didn't come, decisions made without me, conversations where I was told, gently but firmly, that I was overreacting. That I needed to be the bigger person. That I should be happy he'd found love again. I was happy for him. That was the part no one listened to. I just didn't want to be erased in the process. The turning point came when my son graduated high school. I invited my father months in advance. He said he'd check. Weeks passed. Then, 2 days before the ceremony, he called and said they'd planned a trip and couldn't change it. He sounded annoyed that I was disappointed. She thinks it would be a hassle, he said. You know how she gets about schedules. Something in me broke quietly then. No shouting, no confrontation, just a deep, tired understanding. I told him it was fine. I meant it in the way people mean things when they've given up. After that, I stopped trying so hard. Calls became infrequent, visits polite and short. I showed up when expected and disappeared when convenient. We settled into a relationship that looked calm on the surface and felt hollow underneath. When he got sick, she was in charge. She handled the doctors. She decided who visited and when. I sat in waiting rooms feeling like a guest in my own father's life. When he passed, I stood beside her at the funeral, listening to people praise their marriage, their devotion, their love story. No one asked me how it felt to lose a father twice. There are things I can't fix now. I can't go back and demand space I was too careful to claim. I can't confront a man who's been gone for over a decade. I can't retrieve the years where I made myself smaller so someone else wouldn't be uncomfortable. What I can do is sit with the truth. That silence has a cost. That being, understanding, can sometimes mean being abandoned slowly, politely, with a smile. If you're listening to this and it stirs something in you, I won't tell you what to do. I don't give advice anymore. I'll just say this. Pay attention to what you're asked to swallow. Pay attention to how often you're told to be quiet for the sake of peace. I made it to old age. I had a career. I raised a good son. I'm grateful for many things. But some nights, when the house is too quiet, I think about the boy who stood in that living room after his mother died, believing his father and him would hold each other up. We didn't, and that's something time never gave back. If this meant something to you, maybe that's